If you're watching this video, you've probably heard of Hermitcraft. They've heard of Hermitcraft, they wouldn't watch your terrible video. Shush. But basically, one of the Hermitcraft members named TangoTek did the tango with his sanity and created a bunch of new tech to make Decked Out 2, which easily puts him in the game to gain the title of the best game ever built inside the game. So instead of working on my base, I thought I'd do a few Decked Out runs, but then I remembered you have to be good at the game to be on Hermitcraft, so this is the best I've got. For now, at least. But before we can build anything, I first need a place to actually build, and this area meets the criteria perfectly. Although there's definitely a few too many trees here, so even though I literally just built a tree farm so I wouldn't have to do this anymore, let's do some deforestation. Much better. And with that done, we're ready to start building, so I guess I should actually explain what I'm building. So I'm obviously not just going to be building an exact replica of Decked Out, because no. So instead what I'm doing is making a Decked Out themed arcade style game. And the concept of the game is fairly simple. You basically just have an item that bounces back and forth, just like my subscriber count. And while it's doing so, there'll be various hazards and traps and whatnot that try to stop it from reaching the end. To be completely transparent, I'm not much of a redstoner, so I intentionally chose a really simple game design so that it wouldn't be hard to make at all. Or at least that's what I thought 2 weeks ago. Anyway, in order to avoid losing, which is generally the desired outcome, in front of each of these levels there'll be a series of buttons which can be used to either turn off or move around certain obstacles. And just to push the player's buttons, the buttons that the player pushes won't be in the same order as the obstacles. And as I'm sure you can guess from the overall layout, each one of these sections represents one of the floors of Decked Out. So starting off with floor 1, the first obstacle I'm going to recreate is the river, which if you're not careful can easily become a trap. So to do that I'll add in a small water stream, which should just barely reach the track. Perfect. And then we can add in a few pistons that will cut the river off, which will connect to the blue button. And this is why we're doing the river first. There, so now whenever you push the blue button, the water will be stopped. And if you don't push the button in time, then the item will get pushed off the front, which is actually a pretty big hazard as there's only a few pixels of water visible, so it's pretty easy to forget about. The next few obstacles are going to be dispensers that randomly shoot fire. And although fire isn't really a problem in the first floor, you could say that fire ravages items, which obviously is related to Decked Out, as another place you find fire is the Nether, and to get there you need a portal made of obsidian, which can only be mined using a diamond pick, and that can be obtained by trading with villagers, and one of the 5 village type is in a snowy biome, and what else has snow? Decked Out. Oh, so ravagers. Alright, I have all the dispensers hooked up now, and as you can see, this redstone's gonna get messy pretty quickly. For the most part, all the redstone's fairly simple, where it's pretty much just a bunch of redstone lines connecting stuff. But one thing you're gonna see a lot throughout this build is this little system here. And really all this does, whenever the dispenser with the powdered snow on top like a tower is powered, the powdered snow will either pop up like a flower or go back inside and cower. And every time that happens, the signal strength of this comparator changes, so that every time the button is pushed, it will switch the redstone line on and off, essentially making the button work like a lever. And this is what smart people like to call a T flip-flop, or a T sandal or whatever. Yeah, me teaching redstone's probably not a good idea. Anyway, let's head back to the front. In order to easily tell what each of the buttons does, the obstacles are color coordinated using banners. But you'll notice that some of the banners are half colored and half black, and this means that the obstacle is hooked up to some kind of randomizer. So unlike the solid colored ones where you're fully in control, the half colored ones are mostly about undoing whatever the randomizer does. Almost every obstacle involving fire, or lava in some of the later levels, is going to be hooked up to some kind of randomizer, but the orange one works a little bit differently. Instead of putting out the fire, whenever you push the button, it will swap between the 2 orange spots, so you always have to make sure it's out of the item's way. And since the fire of course is our item ravagers, moving it around is just like moving around the ravagers in Decked Out. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. But speaking of things relating to Decked Out, you're probably wondering what this piston represents, and well, it's just a piston. Not really sure what you were expecting. But anyway, this one works pretty much exactly the same as the fire, where whenever the randomizer turns it on, you press the button to turn it off. So basically, if the red button's available to push, you definitely want to press it, especially if it's underneath a video. To take the banner system a bit further, there's also going to be a few obstacles that have solid black banners, and with these ones, once they turn on, they can't be turned off. So it's always going to be a bit frustrating whenever a black banner one turns on, so hopefully you're not Bruce Banner, but there's always going to be a way to avoid it. To avoid this one, you press the line button, which will open up the middle of the first path and drop the item through. And because I'm slightly evil, I intentionally put one of the fire spots exactly where the item drops. Now that we've added a bunch of stuff that'll make the players hate me, let's add in some of the nicer things. Especially in the first floor of Decked Out, as you just saw, there's berries all over the place, which can be a very sweet item to have, especially if like a mole, you're going reasonably deep down in the dungeon. So on either side of the game, there's going to be a dispenser that randomly shoots berries onto these green platforms. And if you somehow find some extra time while doing all the other stuff, you can drop them down, which will give you a few bonus points. But in order to set that up, I'll need more than 1 berry, so let's do some farming. That should be enough for now. Anyway, I mentioned that the berries give you bonus points, but I haven't said anything about how you get normal points, so I should probably make a point of pointing that out. The point system's really simple. Every time you successfully get your item to the end, you get a point. However, once the item reaches the end, the game's not over. Instead, it will just loop back to the beginning and just go through the course over and over again until you either lose or you end the game. Or at least it will once I actually do the redstoning. In order to end a run in Decked Out, you relinquish your ever so relished artifact down a big hole. But given the space, I think the closest we're going to be able to get to it is like this. And all that does is whenever you push the game ending button, it will open a hole in the ice which you have to drop the item through. And I should also mention, no matter how many times you go through the course or how many berries you collect, if the game doesn't end with the item dropping down the hole, you don't get any points at all. Alright, I've added this little thing to the end of the track, so now whenever an item makes it here, it will count up a point and then send a signal back to the start, which will shoot another item. So now it should loop continuously. Perfect. So far we have a few similarities to Decked Out, but we're still missing a pretty big one, and that's the whole clank system, which makes the game harder the longer you play. At max clank, evokers are released, which begin to spawn Vex throughout the dungeon, so I thought I'd try adding some Vex of my own. Vex of course standing for Vertical Extension Xylophone. And the way that works is every time you reach the end, there's a chance that this redstone block will get pushed over, which will lower the floor down a few blocks. And whenever that happens, you'll have a fourth track you need to get through before reaching the end, which includes 3 more item ravagers and probably a few tiers. And since the whole clank system's a pretty key part of Decked Out, I'll have this same Vex system on all 3 levels. And speaking of key parts of the system, the last button we have to set up is for the key part of the system. To get between floors and Decked Out, you first have to find a key, then you bring it to one of the key locations, which unlocks the next level. So similarly, I have this spot in the middle which will randomly have keys dispensed onto it. And if you're able to drop one of the keys down and finish the level, then you'll move on to level 2. Oh, so of course whenever I say something similar to Decked Out, I mean it's the same idea, but 10 times less everything. I've mentioned that a lot of these obstacles will be hooked up to randomizers, but I haven't actually built any of them yet, so I'm gonna need one there, there, and no, that's it. And of course we need a way to power all these randomizers, so I added in this black line, which does just that. And to make it so the black line gets powered over and over again instead of just once, I have it hooked up to this hopper chain, which will activate it every time the item inside makes it around. Also, before you tell me, I know a lot of this redstone could probably be done better, but my redstone skills are about as rusty as a certain iron golem, so if it works, it works. Which hopefully it does. The next thing I'm adding is the losing system, which based on my skill level will probably be the most used part of this whole thing. And the way this works is as soon as the game starts, this pulse extender is turned on, and then every time the item makes it to the end of any of the tracks, it receives another pulse keeping it on. So then if the item doesn't make it to the end of the track, then this will turn off, making you lose. Alright, we now have a few of the rather important gameplay systems in place, so now we just need to build the resetting system, so you can actually play the game more than once. And for that, there's quite a few things that need to happen, like every fire needs to be put out, the piston needs to be retracted, if there's any leftover berries they need to be destroyed. The orange line's a little bit more complicated, because not only does it need to be put out, are you sick of YouTubers rambling on and on when you really just don't care? Don't you wish you had something to do? Perhaps a button to push? Perhaps a red button with white lettering? Are you sick of YouTubers asking for subscribers? Doesn't it make you want to just throw your device out of a 7-story window? If you're like me, you suffer from color blindness and are deathly afraid of the color purple, so to deal with this I've been going. I'm not even... Okay, that's more than enough of that. Alright, the resetting system should be done, so now whenever the game turns off this will happen, which is honestly pretty satisfying. And with that, the first level is now somewhat functional, other than there being no way to actually start it, but who needs that really? But I think we can all agree it doesn't look that great, so let's deck it out with the Decked Out color palette. So obviously nothing too special, it's mostly just snow and andesite, but as you go down I did try to include some bricks to represent the crypts part of the floor. So let's just make sure everything's still working, which I know it will, I just want to push the button again. Just like I said before, in order to get to the next level, you first have to drop a key down and beat the first one, so I built this system which basically just checks if that's happened. To explain how this thing works, let's take a look at it step by step. No one cares. Not even a little bit at all. Yeah, okay. Before we do any more redstoning, the stuff we already have is starting to get a little bit messy, and it obviously never won't be, but a lot of it's underground, so we could at least unbury it a little bit. It looks like we've got ourselves a wandering trader. Let's see if he's got anything good. Yeah, that'll work. Anyway, let's do some digging. Well, that was a lot more digging than I expected, which I guess shows you just how much redstone we still have left to do. Yeah, I should probably pick up the pace. Anyway, let's move on to the second floor, the Caves of Carnage. As soon as you enter the door to the floor, the first thing you'll see is lava and lava some more. So instead of having dispensers that shoot fire like we did in the first level, this one's gonna have dispensers that shoot lava. And these will work in pretty much the same way as the fire, in that whenever they randomly turn on, you just have to push the button to turn them off. However, the lava will be flashing on and off, so even when it is on, there's still a slight chance your item can make it through without being destroyed, which makes it a bit more interesting. And we have another one. Let's see what we have this time. Oh nice, we got the good one. Since both of the lava dispensers are hooked up to the light blue button, you're obviously going to be pushing it quite a bit. So because I'm so kind, I decided to add a similar color button, which when you push will light the track on fire and basically just make you lose. Another big part of the second floor are the dripstone caves, which can be pretty easy to get stuck in. So up here I'm adding in a block swapper, which will switch out part of the track with dripstone, and if you don't switch it back in time, then you too will quite literally get stuck on the dripstone. And speaking of getting stuck, on floor 2 there's also a spider cave that's filled with cobwebs. So I was going to use webs to make a trap, but then I watched a webinar on the World Wide Web where I learned that you can't actually push them around at all, which left me in a bit of a sticky situation. So instead I'm using 2 back-to-back fence gates, which in order to get through you have to push the button twice, so just like the cobwebs, they're gonna take up quite a bit of your time. But just to make it a bit more clear, we can also use some item frames. And with that, there's only one obstacle remaining. Unlike most of the game where you can only control the obstacles, for this one you're in control of the item. So basically as soon as the item makes it over there, it's just gonna sit there until you push the green button to send it across. But every one of these pistons is gonna be firing on and off, so you have to make sure you time it right. Right now, this obstacle isn't really related to Decked Out, but if we add some slime to the pistons and place down a few chains, then it kinda looks like Decked Out's most time-consuming trap, especially for some people. I should also mention, you only have about 7 or 8 seconds to send the item across, otherwise you lose. If you haven't figured it out already, pretty much everything makes you lose. Actually, right now nothing makes you lose, because I haven't done any of the redstoning, so I should probably do that. So I'll start with a slime block, then add some snow the color of chalk, a block swapper, a downward facing hopper, a few repeaters with many ticks, a bunch of red glowing sticks, a useless trade, this weird circuit I made, a redstone line, some food from a swine, this isn't very clean, but it should work fine, a randomizer, some blocks the color of fertilizer, a pulse extender, to fit through here you need to be quite slender, some more redstone split into tiers, if you're waiting for a sign it's here, an observer chain, a glass pane, to your ears these rhymes are a pain, so I should probably stop now. There's pretty much all the redstoning done for the second level, ow. But the level itself still isn't done, as there's still a few things we need to talk about. One of the biggest threats in the second floor of Decked Out is a trident wielding drown, so I knew I had to do something with tridents. So on either side of the level, there's a few redstone lamps that will slowly, but not really that slowly, turn on. And if either of the lights make it to the top, then this will happen, which is probably my favorite part of the whole game. So to stop that from happening, whenever you see lights start to turn on, you can simply press these buttons to reset them. Okay, one of you is bad enough, now there's 2? Oops, my bad. So now all that's left of this level are the item collector and the key system. The item collector is once again at the end of the third track, but I decided to make the key spot a little bit higher this time, so that way you have to be extra careful not to drop the item in with it. And if you do drop the item in with it, of course that will make you lose. Again, this game's not very nice. Or fun. Everything should be done now, but I guess we should test it to make sure. Starting with the lava dispensers. Perfect. Then the block swapper. The painfully slow fence gates. And last but not least, we have our Vex obstacle, which seems to be working fine. Although my skills evidently aren't. With the first 2 levels done, all that's left to do now is level 3. But before we do that, I said before, get back up here. Thank you. But before we do that, why don't we take a quick break from the redstoning and do some building. I want to save the big build until the end of the video, so for now I think I'll just build the entryway. This first room is meant to be a miniature version of the Decked Out lobby, so I used a similar floor design and overall color palette, and even add in these little side rooms, which in Decked Out are used by the players, but I'll be, let's say, decorating them a little differently. And yes, I did build this with a 2-block center. Unsubscribing would be understood. But it looks like the game's already trying to punish me. In order to actually enter the dungeon, you first have to courageously commute through a cold cavernous cave. So similarly I built this, which obviously isn't quite as grand, but it should at least set the mood before entering the game. And this is also where the card shop's gonna be, but we barely have a functioning game right now, so we'll worry about that later. Anyway, I think it's time we decorate these side rooms. Because this is a Decked Out themed game, I feel like we have to have at least a couple Ravagers, and this is the perfect spot for them to go. Or at least, a spot. In order to get them, I first have to start a raid, and I'm not sure where any pillager outposts are, but I think I have a banner here somewhere. There it is. Which should take me right there. Perfect. And I have lots of experience getting rid of long-nosed mobs, so this shouldn't take too long. There we go. So now we just need to find a village, and I believe there's actually one right beside the game, so hopefully there's still villagers in it. Okay, good. There's at least one survivor. I say, well, starting a raid. There you are. Alright, I've got all that I need. Have fun with the rest of the raid. I feel like this is a good time to start thinking about how I'm actually gonna get him into the cage. Almost there. So we should be able to just mine through the back. and then if we make our way back to the front, we can nope, never mind. If we escape through the back, break the line of sight, and then make our way back to the front, then we should, nope. Through the back, break the line of sight, then slowly make your way around the side, and there we go. First try. So now we just need to give it a name. One of the Ravagers in Decked Out's name is Skill Issue, so since my game's too small for Ravagers, I think I'll call you Scale Issue. The other Ravager unfortunately escaped, but the name he went by was Clyde, although his birth name was I don't feel like getting another Ravager. Junior. And now that we have another way to get into this room, we can get rid of the door, despite how much adoration we have for it. With that done, let's start working on the third level, the Black Mines. Because of all the wardens, pretty much the entire time you're on the third floor, you have the darkness effect. So for my game, I had to introduce a whole lighting system. You may have noticed this already, but along the top of each of the levels, there's a row of redstone lamps. For the most part, the lighting's really simple, where it basically just turns on the light of whatever level you're playing. But on the third level, some of the buttons have skulk behind them, and if you press any of these buttons, which of course you have to, then the lights will turn off for a few seconds, meaning you have to play in the dark. To add to the confusion, instead of the item moving in an S pattern like it usually does, I was originally going to have it completely randomize which side it came out of every time, but it's already hard enough to get here, so I decided to be nice and not do that. I thought it was because you couldn't get it to work. Well, yeah, but this way makes me sound better. To make the lights a bit more effective, I'm adding in some tinted glass in front of each of the levels, which will also kind of make them look like screens, adding to the overall arcade theme. The original plan was to use a triangle-shaped screen to make it a bit more difficult, but I didn't want to get caught up in a pyramid screen, so I ended up just doing it like this, which not only provides a resolution to our screen problem, but also provides a better resolution to the screen. Now that we've placed all the tinted glass, let's take it right back down again so we can actually work on the level. Because light plays an important role in this level, I obviously can't use any of the fire or lava traps, so most of the obstacles in this level are going to be piston-based. These four colored pistons work exactly the same as the red one over here, where whenever the piston's extended, you simply just push the button to make it not extended. Because of how the redstoning works on these ones, you could just push the buttons over and over again and they'd never pop out. So to prevent that from happening, I started by putting skulk behind one of them, which makes it so that you only want to push the button when you have to. But then I also made it so that whenever you push the purple or green buttons, there's a chance that the orange and blue ones will pop out, so if you're pushing these ones too much, you're likely going to end up blocking yourself on the second track. This fifth middle piston is another one of the black banner ones. So just like the line button from the first level, whenever that piston's active, you're once again gonna have to move the track to get by. Moving on to the third track, much like my upload schedule, this first obstacle looks like a long stretch of nothingness. But whenever it's active, all three of these blocks will be moving in and out, which especially when the lights are off will be really hard to notice. The next obstacle is basically just a smaller version of that one, but what makes this one different is that whenever it turns on, it has a light that turns on with it. And this adds some strategy to the level, because instead of turning it off right away like you do for most obstacles, you might want to leave it on to keep the light. If you really want to, you can even turn it on, but that's probably a bad idea. So now we just have the fourth track, and just like the last one, you once again get to decide when the item gets sent across. This time there's going to be two obstacles in the way. The first one is another piston. I know, how thrilling. But the second one's a little more interesting, as we're going to have a hopper minecart going around in circles, which also fits the theme of the Black Mines really well. So basically if you send the item across too early, then the minecart will suck it up. Then you'll have to suck it up because you just lost. So there's all the obstacles of level 3 done, but there's not a single functioning obstacle in level 3, not even one, so I should probably do some redstoning. But I'll probably need more than 37 redstone to do all that, so I guess I can try something I've been meaning to for a while. In case you didn't know, 1 block in the nether is equivalent to 8 blocks in the overworld, so in theory I should be able to craft a few blocks here, and then if I throw them back through the portal, they should multiply. Perfect, so now we can just repeat that a few times and we should be good. Alright, I think that's enough. I'm honestly not sure why Tango didn't do this for the real Decked Out, but if you fill a shulker box with all the required redstone stuff, you can simply throw it down and it kinda just builds itself in a few seconds. Which of course means that it doesn't take 5 times as long. Well, that level ended up being pretty big, but now in theory everything should be probably at least somewhat working. It's obviously going to be a lot darker once this place is fully closed in, but if we press one of the skulk buttons, we should now see a signal get sent up and then the lights will turn off for a few seconds. Perfect. Most of the redstone's fairly similar to what we've done so far, but the minecart system's a bit more interesting, which I can't really get to at the moment, so if all this other redstone would just go away for a few seconds, that'd be great. Thank you. So basically how it works is every time the item makes it to the end of the third track, it will activate this pink line, which turns on the minecart system. And while it's on, the minecart will break in place over and over again until either the minecart picks up your item and ruins your day, or your item makes it to the end. If you're wondering why the minecart can't just stay on all the time, it's because it'd be able to pull items from the track above it, which isn't exactly ideal. For the players at least. The first two levels have each had something special on the sides of them, and this one's gonna be no different. So for this one there's a lapis block on either side that'll randomly get pushed in and out, and the goal is to push this button whenever you see it pushed out, which is basically just whenever you see it. If you're able to get 3 lapis blocks before losing, you'll unlock the 4th bonus level. In Decked Out, there's sort of a game inside the game, which I like to call Decked Out, where you search the dungeon for various Easter eggs. So the 4th level is my lame version of that. As soon as you get your 3 lapis blocks, this light will turn on and a few note blocks will play to let you know that the bonus level is opened. You'll then only have a few seconds before these dispensers start shooting at the target block, so you have to move these blocks out of the way. But unlike literally everything else in this game, these blocks don't have any colors assigned to them, so just like you have to find eggs in each of the floors of Decked Out, in this game you have to find colors in each of the levels. But actually just 2 of them. The first 2 are hidden behind the ice in the first level, so it's gonna be blue and then red. And then apparently I could only think of one way to hide the banners, so the other 2 are also behind ice, which are brown and orange. You've probably already noticed this, but I added some magenta glazed terracotta in the middle, which is mainly there to help show what's going on, but it actually makes it a lot harder, as soon as you see this block, you instinctively close your eyes and run. Whether you hit the target blocks or not, as soon as you unlock the bonus level, you've successfully completed the game. But hitting them's still a good idea, as each one of them gives you 10 points. And speaking of points, let's build the point system. I thought I finally found a use for the Wandering Trader, but it turns out they don't even drop enough XP to produce Skulk. Even a chicken drops enough. Anyway, pointless systems aside, let's build that point system. The items you're trying to keep alive in this game are emeralds and emerald blocks. The emeralds are worth 1 point, and the emerald blocks are worth 3. So the first 2 levels will mainly just be dispensing emeralds, but there's a slight chance that there could be an emerald block, just to give an occasional few bonus points. But to make the 3rd level a bit more worthwhile, it'll only dispense emerald blocks, giving you 3 points every time you make it to the end. All the emeralds that make it to the end will then be dropped down and taken over there to be counted. For that, of course, I'm using a few lines of water streams, which really streamlines the process. To make it so you only get points if you win, I built this little system, which will dispense all the points into a bubble column if you win, and if you lose, we'll get rid of them all. So that system, of course, has to be hooked up to our losing line, and the rarely used winning line. Then there's this thing on the side, which I think makes it so you don't lose when switching between levels, but honestly I have no idea what it does. Assuming you win, the items are transported up a bubble column and put through a few item sorters to determine how many points you got. But you'll notice there's 3 item sorters, and that's because in addition to the emeralds, the berries from level 1 will also give you a point each. Once all the items have gone up and then down, they're sent right back up again to get to the scoreboard. The scoreboard I was going to use was basically an automated version of the Decked Out one, where I'd use some snow golems and pistons to drop down a snow layer for every point. But it turns out once you get to 6 layers, they kinda just start breaking, so that's obviously not gonna work. So instead I'll just be dropping items down into shulker boxes. One of the main currencies in Decked Out are frost embers, so the lesser version of that I'll be using as points are frost sparks. But anyway, let's do all the redstoning for it. Alright, that should be everything. To test it out, let's throw in, say, 10 points worth of emeralds, and we should see them all travel up the bubble column, get sorted, which you can't actually see, and then converted into frost sparks. Then back at the top, these lights will turn on, letting you know that there's points available, and from there you simply just push the button in front of your shulker box and all the points will be dropped there. Perfect. So now we just have one system left to build, and that's the card system, which is also finally the one that actually starts the game. Believe it or not, your deck is a pretty important part of Decked Out, as the cards you choose will change the way you play the game. The card system in this game is obviously not going to be nearly as complicated, as there's only going to be 3 cards, but each of them will still change the game a bit. The first card is called Deep Frost, and what it does is it freezes the river, removing one of the big obstacles from level 1, which makes it a lot easier to farm for points, especially with the berries on the side. The second card, which I think is the best one, makes it so that you start the game with a key in level 1, and this of course makes it a lot easier to get to level 2 and 3. The name I chose for this card is Wish of a Gem, which of course is a reference to a certain hermit who seems to like to Gemini stay on the first floor. The final card deactivates one side of the trident system in level 2, making it a lot easier to manage, and this one of course we're calling One Side Willie, which I may or may not have added just for the name. To make an item display similar to the ones in Decked Out, I'm just hiding a few armor stands behind blocks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Because there's only 3 cards, the whole concept of deck building doesn't work that well, so instead they'll work like ethereal cards, where you can only use them once to give yourself a sort of power run. So if you don't have any cards, just like in Decked Out where you start the game with a frozen shard, in this game you'll start out with a frozen block, which I know is a really creative name for ice. Other than a couple of item sorters, most of the redstoning is just some simple redstone lines, so nothing too complicated. The card system should be done now, so let's test it out by putting in one of the Deep Frost cards, and from this we should see the lights turn on, an emerald get dispensed, and the river freeze. Which seems to have all happened. Perfect. So I think we can just go ahead and assume all the cards work then, because that's definitely how testing works. With the card system probably done, all of the systems are probably done, and yeah, that was a lot of redstoning. but right now it just looks like a big mess of redstone, so I want it to be more like the real Decked Out, where instead of a mess, the building intimidates you to the point where you confess utter distress. So to fix that, let's build a building unlike anything you've seen before. And we're done. The bottom part of the build should look familiar, as it's pretty heavily inspired by the Decked Out building. And by inspired, of course I mean copied and made smaller, which was actually pretty hard to do, as not only was there a lot of details I had to fit in, but there's also a lot of spikes, which are generally easier to build bigger, especially these diagonal ones, so there was a lot of failed attempts before getting these less failed attempts. Then there's also the problem of me building this thing with a 2-block center, so there's a lot of weird stuff like this to make it look like it doesn't have a 2-block center. So basically, if you're ever working on a project that has a 2-block center, then don't. Like I said, most of the build is a copy, but up at the top, I sort of signed the build with my own style. These outer sections are filled with these big frozen flames, surrounded by a bunch of not so big unfrozen flames. Then above it all, we have this giant Decked Out sign, which I think really helps to give the arcade feel. On top of all the horns and eyes and whatnot, to make it really fit in with the rest of the build, I tried to make the lettering look really sharp, and then I also made the T look like a key, which I think was a good choice by me. But you'll notice there's a small asterisk above the text, so if we head to the back of the sign, we can see the continuation of that. So that's the building pretty much done, but I feel like we're still missing a centerpiece here. So for that I want to build a statue of a Ravager, and unlike the one we caught earlier, this one won't have a scale issue. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Then we can also just scatter a bunch of Wither skeleton skulls around it to represent all its friends, which also probably represents the number of hours I spent killing Wither skeletons. With all those placed in, the build is officially done, so now we just need to name it. The real building is called the Deep Frost Citadel, so I guess that makes mine the moderate depth room temperature shed. But anyway, let's head back inside, and as you can see, or I guess can't see, it's a lot darker in here now. To finish this room off, I've also added another set of these purple glowing eyes above the scoreboard. I know I've done a lot of things this episode, so doing another one would just be attire, but I feel like before we play this game for the first time, I should change my attire. Much better. And now it's finally time to play. With all the practice I've had testing this game, on my first attempt I successfully lost on the very first obstacle. The second run didn't go much better, but now that the room's a lot darker, you can probably start to see what I meant when I said the tinted glass kinda makes the levels look like screens. On the next run I got lucky and had a key drop almost right away, but unfortunately my skills are yet to undrop, so I still failed. Even just based off the last few runs, you can probably tell that the orange obstacle is definitely the hardest, but surprisingly the red piston one made me lose quite a few times too. On this run we had our first black banner obstacle turn on, which I showed off really well by losing instantly. At this point I was pretty happy that the reset system looks cool, cause yeah, you see it quite a lot while playing this game. I then proceeded to fail again and again and again, before finally deciding to use the wish of a gem card so that I could post this video before Christmas of 2027. You'd think I'd do better with the card being played, but I still failed many times before finally getting this run. Now on to level 2, which is definitely my favorite of the levels, although that doesn't mean I'm any better at it. And of course every failed attempt at this level also means you have to beat the first one again to get back here. For the sake of this video, I could have just added a secret switch that tricks the key system into thinking the first level is beat, but I would never do something like that. The cobweb obstacle is a pretty hard one, as not only do you have to start opening it pretty much as soon as the level turns on, but if you get unlucky like I did here, it can also close at a really bad time. Another obstacle you have to deal with really quickly when making it to level 2 is the block swapper, but at least this one will always be on when you get there, so there's at least some consistency to it. While dealing with those two obstacles and all the others, you also have to make sure the trident lights never make it to the top, so multitasking is definitely the key to winning. And on this attempt I got the other key to winning, and was able to beat this level a lot faster than the first, despite a really close call at the end. And now we have the final level, which turned out to be very difficult, as there's a lot of obstacles that can just pop out at any moment. So let's just skip all the filler commentary and say I failed again and again and again and again before I got this run where I failed again, until finally I got this run. At the start I was getting pretty lucky with the obstacles not turning on too much, so I was able to get the first lapis block relatively easily. And it turns out the lapis blocks were quite difficult to get, so I switched to only needing 2 of them to unlock the secret, which I just barely got before the game registered that I'd lost. So now we just have the 4th bonus puzzle, which is really easy for me since I made it. And you'll notice the item I decided to shoot from the dispensers was eggs, because I'm like that. From here all that's left to do is collect the points. And with that, the whole game has now been played, and every brick of the building laid, so that's gonna be it for me today. Thanks for watching, and see you all in the next episode.